Hi, thank you very much for joining us on the Open World Forum TV show. We have a great opportunity today to meet a fantastic guy from Google, Chris DiBona. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
You're the open source program manager at Google.
That's
it
correct.
Means
yes.
that there's a lot of things to say about Google and open source.
Yeah.
How can we begin to talk about Google and open source?
Well, so it's worth pointing out my job is not just talking about open source. It's also looking after compliance for the company, making sure that we use the licenses properly, and helping groups like Android and Chrome and the rest release software efficiently and under the right kind of open source regimes. So it's a pretty awesome job.
Perhaps you can begin with the usage of open source inside Google.
Sure, yeah.
Are you a big open source user?
Yeah, no, we use tons of open source code. Probably tens of millions of lines of code come from outside the company and are used at Google. And we've released about 18 million lines of code from Google in the form of patches and software projects. We release about 2 to 3 projects a week, and one major project like Android every 6 to 9 months.
Yeah,
so.
And are you really in the process of returning back some development to the community?
Oh yeah, all the time. So right now, last time we did a survey of and by survey I mean we crawled the internet and looked at all the web pages out there and all the repositories. We found that we had submitted about 87,000 patches into a little over 2,000 open source projects. So we're pretty comfortable with how we give back. We're very good at it. We're very fast. We're very efficient. And then there was an additional, tens of millions of lines of code that came out in new projects from Google. So we give back not just to the projects we already like the kernel and the rest, but also in new projects as well.
During my interview, I met a lot of people talking about open source as tools that can be used inside companies like Google. Do you see open source only as a tool, or do you think it can be really for the consumers, for example?
Well, I mean, obviously we release Android, so we're very consumer-oriented with some of our open source software. Same thing with Chrome, right? Where you have, many, many, many users of these software. So I obviously think that open source is incredibly appropriate for consumers, and it's nice to see that happening at the company. So, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, and everybody knows Google about a free product, not about open source product. Why did you decide to make everything free but not really open?
Well, so we have open source products that are free, and we also have free products that are just free, right?
Yeah.
And so, for instance, Picasa, Google Earth, and the rest, those are still closed. And we try to make sure they run on Linux when we can, right? And then we have things that we've completely open sourced. And it's just a matter of what our engineering priorities at the time, what the engineering staffing looks like for those projects. When you look at Chrome and at Android, both of those from the very, very beginning were meant to be open sourced, right? So we wrote them with that in mind. It's a lot harder to take something that was written without that idea in mind and might have like licensed stuff on it and then release that as open source. It's actually very, very difficult to do. And so we ask ourselves, where are we going to get the biggest bang for our buck as far as time goes? And so we spend more time with the Androids and the Chromes than we do trying to convince the Picasa team to open source, because to do it, they'd have to really redo how they do their development. Yeah. And it's not really fair to them to ask them to do that at their current staffing levels. So.
If we talk about mobility, for example, we are 2 different users. I have an iPad and an iPhone.
Is that open source?
Not really.
Oh, it's not. Oh, that's
not at all.
Yeah. Okay.
And you have an open source one. And the difference is perhaps that the consumers prefer this one. I don't really understand why.
Pointing out, that may not be true anymore, right? So we're shipping a little over 200,000 Android-based devices a day, which is a staggering number, and it's only going up. And that's with manufacturers from Samsung to HTC to Motorola, and soon Sony Ericsson and others, all shipping Android-based devices.
How do you analyze the fact that Apple created the market of that?
I completely disagree with the idea that Apple created this market. They have a very nice phone, don't get me wrong. And their App Store was pretty great, but they were hardly the first person with an App Store with a smartphone. So they did a very nice job of it. But I don't believe in abdicating to Apple innovation or design or anything. I think that's ridiculous.
Okay. As a last question, during the last year, the bad guy was Microsoft. Today, I see a lot of people telling each time Google is launching a new service, they say, another one from Google, everything is at Google for me. And do you think that in the next year, Google will be the bad guy?
So I think that we have a responsibility to be a good guy, so we don't become the next bad guy. I think there are plenty of companies that want to be a bad guy, and I honestly think that we don't want to be that company, and so we do what we can to show that, right?
Do you think open source can
very
help
difficult
you?
Sometimes. I think open source is important to that, but the reason we do open source is not because we care about you thinking we're good or bad, right? The reason we do open source is because it's the right engineering decision to do it, right? It's the right thing to do, right? It's not that it's... I don't care if you think it's right. I know it's right from an engineering perspective to use open source software and release open source software in pursuit of our strategic goals as a company, right? Open source software is very important to keeping the internet a free and fair place. So if we can support that, the internet remains a free and fair place where we thrive, right? So you can make it all selfish and say, well, Google wants free and open source software and a free internet because it's good for Google's ad revenue, right? And that would be true, right? But it's also the right thing to do for our engineering staff, you know? And I have to be honest with you, if you want to attract a really good engineering staff, understanding open source and understanding how to help them release open source software and patches means you can have a kernel team, you can have a GCC team, you can have compiler teams. Otherwise, they won't give you the time of day because they don't want to be locked in this world where they can't share their information around computer science. And so it's really good to have open source as being part of your company. So.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much. I think you're the only one I interview. I don't have to remember the website. So if you want to know something about Google, go somewhere. I don't know where.
A search engine,
perhaps. To a search engine to search for Google. Thank you very much for joining us on the TV show from the Open World Forum. Thank you very much. Bye.